Thank you for all the support on my last video, so here is this part. Naruto waited while seated on a large rock as Mei went around and called the majority of her forces for an important meeting. While those who showed up weren't the entirety of those who made up the rebellion given they had multiple base camps, it was still a fairly large number to see in one place. Given the fact they were nearly going to attack Kiri in full due to the false reports the various spies from Konoha had given them, it made sense. Mei got in front of the people and called for the various spies to come forward along with some others since she was certain the spies talked to one another, and this way they wouldn't catch on quick enough. She explained she was sending them on the mission to deliver messages to the others to begin moving out, but with a snap of her fingers, they were all detained by her most trusted shinobi who she had explained what was happening right now. Of course the spies were verbal about being detained, with Mei pointing at the various extras who her shinobi released since they were not traitors themselves. It has come to my attention from a credible source, stated Mei with a pissed-off growl, that you have all betrayed us by becoming spies of Konoha. We have no idea what the hell you are talking about, said one of the spies, who happened to be a young woman. But she wasn't able to say any more since Mei had grabbed her by the throat. The spy struggled of course, but Mei stopped her struggles with a simple flick of her wrist, thus making an audible snap heard by everyone around them. She then threw the woman to the side since she didn't care about what happened to the corpse anymore. There is no use lying, said Mei, since I already know the truth. Fucking bitch, said one of the men, stopping his not-so-persuasive act of unknowing what she was on about. I can't wait until Konoha comes and ends your life. Or better yet, I hope your ass gets caught and raped over and over again to bear bastard children who will then become the slaves of the ones in charge. Mei grew red in the face as she heard this, and was just about to use a kunai to stab him in the head, but it was at this point that Naruto quickly made his move and grabbed her arm so that the kunai didn't connect. What are you doing? Asked Mei angrily since she had no idea as to why Naruto was stopping her from killing this traitor. He had been the one to show her the truth about what was happening behind the scenes, so why would he aid this person? Simply stopping you from killing this traitor so easily, said Naruto seriously, since by stabbing him in the head like you were planning to do would have ended his life far too quickly. I have a better means for you to end his life. I'm listening, said Mei with a raised eyebrow since she was curious as to what he had to do it. She had already been surprised about the simple portable data screen he had used to show her the evidence he had on these traitors. Use this, said Naruto with a smirk as he pulled out his trusty B3 wingman and held it by the barrel so she could take hold of the breech of the gun. Mei took it, but she was hesitant to do so since she had no idea what the hell it was that he was handing her. What is this? Asked a confused Mei as she held the gun in her hand. Well, to make the explanation real simple, since there is a lot of science and technical jargon to explain it fully, what you do is grab the thing I handed you, which is a gun, and pull that trigger you see as you point the end at this man. Naruto then grabbed the man's head roughly and pulled it back a bit to expose the neck more while using his finger to point to a specific area near the center of it. And I would suggest you aim for this area of the neck before you do. The damage will be painful to him, it can't be fixed, and he will bleed out slowly all the while. Plus he won't be able to speak, so there is a plus. You are a very sadistic man, you know that, right? Asked Mei with a raised eyebrow since in all honesty he really was. The fact he told her to go for the more prolonged painful method of disposal was more than enough proof. Live your entire life abused and beaten within an inch of your life nearly every day, said Naruto calmly, a life like mine does not breed a compassionate man. Mei was surprised to hear him say that, but she had heard about how many Jinchuriki were treated, so she knew his life was terrible, just not how badly it truly was. But what surprised her more was that she had in her hand was a gun. She had heard about such deadly weapons from stories of the past, but as far as she knew no such thing still existed in the world now. So now she would be able to see if the stories she had heard about such a deadly weapon were in fact a reality. So she did as Naruto instructed and pointed the wingman at the traitor's neck. Once pointed at the right spot, she squeezed the trigger she saw, and she literally jumped as she heard the bang the gun made as it tore through the man's throat, leaving a very large hole that was oozing blood. Naruto smirked as he saw the man's neck wound flowing heavily with blood, and pushed him to the side since he was doomed as he was right now. There wasn't a medical shinobi alive who could heal a high-caliber bullet wound through the throat. Not even the likes of Tsunade could do it. "Dear Kami," said one of the shinobi holding onto a traitor to keep him on his knees, "to think such a thing existed in the world like the stories spoke of." "Indeed," said Naruto with a chuckle, "but this is simple in comparison to others. But we will get to that later. Mei, I believe you have others to deal with." Mei quickly composed herself from jumping in fright, but she then smirked like Naruto had since he had been right by having her end these traitors this way. From the looks on the face of the guy whose neck she shot, it was extremely painful, and that worked perfectly for her. So she simply signaled for her shinobi to copy what Naruto had done and held the spies' heads so that their necks were more exposed. And one by one, Mei shot each one of them in the throat. She did have to stop though a few times since the gun only held 8 bullets. They usually only held 6, but Naruto modified his pistol to hold 8. Never knew when you would need those 2 extra bullets. At those points, Naruto held out his hand, which Mei would then give him his gun back, and then pulled out extra bullets and reloaded the weapon for her, ending it with a spin of the barrel for showmanship. Within 30 minutes, the traitors all lay dead, or dying since the last ones had just been shot. "So," said Naruto with a smirk, "feeling better?" "Not quite," said Mei as she motioned for one of her shinobi to go into the main tent. The man listened and dragged out Ao, who was still knocked out from. "Fuck. His face disgusts me so much. To think I trusted him for so long." "Believe me when I say I know exactly how you feel," said Naruto with a bit of a growl as the memories of Hinata came to mind. "Do you have anything stronger than this?" asked Mei, "since I want to just eliminate his face all at once. It disgusts me that much." "Now that you mention it," said Naruto with a chuckle. He then unsealed his other weapon he had, which he never really needed to use given his wingman was more than enough for most things in this world. It wasn't like his enemies had advanced ballistic armor to warrant such higher caliber ammunition. So this time he held out his SA-3 Mozambique, which was a pistol that held and fired 3 shotgun shells before needing to be reloaded. He took his wingman back, but gave that to her in return. "It's too bad he is knocked out like this," said Mei in a pissed-off tone of voice, "since a traitor shouldn't be able to sleep through his execution." "Well, luckily for you I have a means to wake him up," said Naruto as he wiped out his shock baton and switched it on before he jabbed Ao in the chest. Said man woke up with a scream, but since he was being electrocuted with a non-lethal amount of electricity it made sense that he was. Mei just looked at Naruto with a really look. She was so going to have words for the person who let him into their base camp without thoroughly searching for weapons. "Well, good morning, sleepyhead," said Naruto sarcastically. "Rise and shine." "What the hell did you do to me?" demanded Ao in anger as he tried to move, but it was then that he felt he was restrained and on his knees. He tried to get up, but the damage he sustained from the shock baton was playing hell with his nerves. "I think that the better question to ask right now is, what am I doing to you?" said Naruto as he stepped to the side and Mei stepped forward. "Before I end your life," said Mei with a serious yet still fairly pissed tone of voice, "I want to know why? Why did you betray Kiri like you did?" "You really wish to know?" said Ao with a laugh that only pissed off Mei as well as many of the other shinobi who heard him laughing. "The reason I did so was that Kiri is destined to fall. Look how it has fallen these past few years. This civil war is just the wake-up call I needed to see the truth on the matter. No matter who wins this war, the leadership will either be far too weak to keep the village in line or too insane and continue what Yagura started with the genocide of those with bloodlines. No matter which way you go, Kiri will fall. I did as I did to survive, but apparently I failed to do even that right. So before you kill me, you weak bitch, I just want to say that I will see you in. Ao's last words were cut off as Mei pulled the trigger of the gun in her hand. The entire front of Ao's face was gone, with a third of his brain being visible with shards of his skull sticking out of it. I said I wanted to know why, not your last words, traitor, said Mei as he walked by Naruto and basically shoved his gun into his chest. While the act of killing the traitors had helped to alleviate the rage that had grown inside her, there was still so much of it that would take time to dissipate fully. We are leaving, said Mei simply, spread the word to pack up everything. The shinobi who had seen her execute the traitors began to move out and tell everyone what she had ordered. She then ordered a few other shinobi to go out and tell the other bases the same thing, but also let them know of the spies they had in their camps so as to eliminate them before they moved out. She then went back into the main tent to sit down and relax for a bit before she had to move out as well. It had been a long day, one she was just glad was over for the moment. The forces of Kiri had been a major increase for the numbers of the militia, and it would only help in the long run given the more soldiers they had, the less casualties they would take when they finally began their operation to eliminate Konoha off the face of the map. The other camps filled with the members of the rebellion had gotten word to move out to a specific location near the water, but not before eliminating the other spies who had been in their own camps. They did so easily enough and moved out as ordered. Once there, they were met with about a dozen airships, each big enough to hold a battalion of people within it. But also there was Utakara himself to greet his old allies. Mei was shocked to see him alive since she had gotten word that he had died, but she was then told that that bit of information was a lie since Konoha had tried to capture him to get the Biju within him for themselves. Utakara being there made the act of getting the people on the airships all the more easier since he was able to vouch that Naruto was not going to do anything nefarious to them. So little by little they all boarded them until they were all within them. Once seated and had their safety belts fastened, the airships lifted up until they were higher than one could visibly see and set off towards New Angel City. While it might have seemed unnecessary to do all that, you got to remember that these airships were big. This way, there was no one to see them come and go as they went to their destination. Hell, the things were capable of traveling through space, at least to the point of docking into the main ship, but still this was nothing. Once they landed in New Angel City, the doors opened up and the people all began to walk out. There they were greeted by the others who had stayed behind, and with them were BT as well as Koyuki's Monarch Titan, who each saluted Naruto as he himself got off the airship. After the usual gawking over the technologically advanced city they now found themselves, Naruto as well as Utakara showed them towards the main warehouse where the learning pods were located. He told them what they were for and explained how to use them. He then showed them the houses and told them to pick whatever one they wanted that didn't already have someone living inside it. There was plenty to go around, so there weren't any issues with the relocation. And for the past year, those from Kiri had been in the pods learning as the rest of them had before them. And like he had expected, there were many who wanted to be Titan pilots, with Mei being one of them as well. While many tried, very few actually accomplished their goal, with Mei piloting a Scorched Titan herself. This made Naruto laugh like when Koyuki had picked her own Titan, since Mei had the bloodline of lava, and her Titan was made to burn her enemies with thermite, so it was a match made in heaven. Utakara was himself a Titan pilot as well as the best sniper they had. The man had perfect patience as well as the steadiest hand, which went hand in hand with the art of sniping, and so he was better than most others. He held the record out of everyone for the longest shot in the simulator, which had been broken once by a young woman after so many tries, yet Utakara easily beat her new record with a single try. He piloted a Tone Titan, which were the long-range models of the things. While they had the numbers now to launch a fully successful attack against Konoha, if they did that now, there would still be those who would slip through the cracks and wait to eliminate them when they got the chance. And so after explaining this to the others, who agreed with his plan after some persuasion, Naruto kept himself busy with training in the simulators alongside the others. Here they had mock battles against not only themselves, but artificial forms of the various shinobi from Konoha. And time again they were able to win against the forces of Konoha with minimal losses given their superior firepower and technology. Yet things would change over time, as well as the fact there would be other places they would have to attack when this war Konoha was about to start was fully over. Plus the simulation was Konoha in its current state. There was no telling what would happen to it in the near future given the advancements the village was making with the stolen tech they had from Snow Country. At one point, Naruto had even considered constructing a factory to commence the construction of BRD-01 Spectres, yet from the various sources of history he read about the militia and the war they faced against the IMC. The militia didn't really use them in their fight given they were nothing short of cannon fodder. True, they were a threat in large numbers, but he decided against them in the end since there was that one glaring fact that they could be hacked. While he didn't believe that any one of the shinobi of this world could pull that off given the technology was far superior to anything this world had originally, it was better to err on the side of caution given in time, people might seek to take control of everyone in the future. Peace was never eternal. Speaking of that village, Naruto had been observing the situation coming out of the village, and he had to say he was pleased with the results of his actions towards that place. The higher-ups of Konoha were confused that their plans were not going as they had planned them out. For years they had been playing both sides of the Kiri civil war to weaken them so that when one side won they could swoop in themselves and eliminate the weakened opposition. But while the reports stated that the main battle was imminent and was poised to commence, when Konoha had arrived to eliminate what they assumed was a weakened enemy, they were hit with the full force of Kiri's army. Konoha managed to prevail in the end given they had the means to counter Yagura even in his tailed form, but the fact that they were at peak strength cost Konoha more lives than they had initially thought they would. Some of the casualties included both Asuma as well as his nephew Kano Amaru and his gang. Then there was Shino as well as Kiba, the latter of whose mother was utterly furious given they were told the fight would be easy and yet they lost so much more than they expected. Konoha had looked into this, but they found no trace of the former rebel forces. It was like they had just up and disappeared given they weren't in any other country. They had plenty of spies everywhere so they would easily be able to find an army if that was the case, yet it wasn't. Eventually they came up with the thought that maybe the rebels had fled west beyond the elemental continent to seek refuge. Konoha, nor any other village for that matter, had spies or intel about the lands beyond, so while at first it seemed far-fetched, the fact there was no other explanation made it seem more and more realistic by the day. But on a more personal note that pleased Naruto greatly, he overheard the moment that Hinata was told of Sasuke's demise. The various shinobi sent to find him all failed to recover the body, but they told her that he died a true shinobi. Hinata had been beside herself with grief and sadness, but after some time to grieve, she set out to train her son so that he would not share the same fate as his father. Naruto could only smirk since she had no idea just how wrong she was given that the whole village would suffer the same fate in the coming year or two. Over time, Naruto was not the only person who was in the command center, since there were many who specialized in intel gathering who joined him once they themselves learned just how to use the equipment in this place. Naruto was honestly happy since it was good to have multiple people paying attention to the ways of the world rather than just him. But eventually, Konoha had increased their strength with more refined and improved chakra armor as well as airships. And with their strength increased, they made plans to begin their plan to wage war with every other village. So that was where they were at this point of time. Naruto had called Yotakera for a mission he trusted with no one else given just how vital it was. You called me commander, said Yotakera as he made his way into the war room. The war room was a side room in the command center where one could plan out their attacks with the holographic display located in the center of the room. Indeed I did 6, said Naruto simply. Naruto had started to call Yotakera 6 given the number of tails his Biju possessed, plus he really liked the idea of code names. Yotakera liked it well enough so he had no complaints on the matter, and while he might be 6, Naruto was given the title commander since he was the senior officer of the militia. He was the first one to become a member, so it made sense. He can't say he started it given it existed before Naruto was born elsewhere, so he was not going to take credit where it wasn't due. Plus, given his tactical genius in the simulated battlefields, he more than earned the title. So what is the situation? Asked Yotakera as he pulled out a tin and rolled himself up a smoke before he lit it with his personal engraved lighter. Yotakera used to always blow bubbles out of a pipe, but ever since he began training to become the pilot he was now, he learned that the training was as stressful as it was hard, so he began to smoke to calm his nerves. Given the fact Naruto had called for him specifically meant that the mission was important given he was a pilot himself who specialized in long-range combat. Konoha has started to make their first moves in their war, stated Naruto as he waved his hand in the air so that the image of a map of the elemental continent was visible to the two of them. Wasn't their attack on Kiri the first step? Asked Yotakera in slight confusion. You know, said Naruto as he thought about it, you have a point there, but I don't see it as that given they manipulated others to fight and only showed up to execute severely weakened shinobi. That's not a battle, that is a massacre, and as such I don't think of it as the start. All right, said Yotakera with a shrug of his shoulders. To be honest, he didn't really care about it. But as I was saying, resumed Naruto, Konoha has begun to make its first moves, but the issue is that they are attacking 2 locations at once. Where are they heading to? Asked Yotakera, who was paying full attention to what Naruto said. They are sending a large chunk of their forces to Suna as we speak, said Naruto sadly. While he had been nearly impulsive enough to send out people to protect Suna, he had to stick to the plan fully. He could not be hypocritical now. He couldn't reveal their forces just yet, but he could still save those who survived so they were not enslaved by Konoha like they planned to do. But they are sending a much smaller group to Wave Country to conquer as well as capture the people there. Why would they do that to their own allies? Asked Yotakera. Because Konoha doesn't want allies, said Naruto with a growl, they want slaves. They want servants to cater to their every whim as they live like the kings their egos make them believe they are. Man, said Yotakera as he sucked in the last bit of his smoke before he blew out the smoke out sideways, I can't wait until we eliminate this village. You and me both, my friend, said Naruto with a chuckle, but we can't do anything major until they win. I find their actions hilarious though. How so? Think about it, said Naruto with a grin as well as a serious look on his face. Konoha has plans to enslave those not from there with a special seal to ensure they never rebel. They are literally marking those who they don't see as their own with an easily identifiable mark. This makes finding out who is against them so easy since they are doing the work for us. Ha, laughed Yotakera as he was with Naruto in his way of thinking, you are right. That is hilarious. But all kidding aside, said Naruto as he once more got serious about the matter at hand, as it is, we can't do too much otherwise those from Konoha might start to put the pieces together. So what is the plan here? Simple, said Naruto with a wave of his hand to show the images of the area they would be observing. 2 squads, small, no more than a dozen soldiers each, will go to their destination. I will lead the squad heading towards Wave while you will need to head the one in Suna. Any particular reason I am being sent to Suna? Said Yotakera with a sigh. He was not one for the desert really, and this plan was sending him smack dab into the center of one. You are the best sniper we got 6, said Naruto, as the images changed to show the forces of Konoha going into Suna in a holographic simulation. But then they came out with the prisoners as well. And when they conquer Suna, they will transport the surviving shinobi back to Konoha to begin re-education into being loyal servants, while Gaara, the Jinchuriki of the one-tailed Biju, will be sealed away until they can reseal the beast into another. "You are still upset about Fu," said Yotakera as he sensed the rage laced in the words, "aren't you?" "Yes," said Naruto simply. Fu was the Jinchuriki of the seven-tailed Biju, and her life had been terrible. The people of Taki, her home village, wouldn't allow her to enter the village, and even worse, had plans to essentially rape her in hopes she gave birth to stronger shinobi to increase their strength. Konoha was no better since they kidnapped her using Danzo's root shinobi and put her in the specially sealed room that they made deep in the lowest sections of the prison that would be impossible to escape from. There was one for each of them, each labeled with their corresponding number, even one for himself. "I understand," said Yotakera, which indeed he did, since another of their own had been captured in a manner they could not be saved. Once the doors were sealed shut, only Minato or Kushina herself had the means to open the doors again, since there were so many explosive tags and several kill switches on not only her body, but Yagura's as well, since he had been captured after Konoha attacked Kiri. Even with all the technology they had, there was nothing at the moment that they could use to free her. Given time they might, but by that time her fate would be sealed and she would be dead with the Biju and someone else. So while they couldn't save her, they would avenge her. "So you will take the best rifleman we have and go to Suna," said Naruto. "Follow the group until they are a reasonable distance away from Suna at night and eliminate the forces of Konoha. The desert is vast and so their bodies will not be found. Hopefully Konoha just assumes that they went west like they thought the former rebels of Kiri did." "Sounds like a solid plan," said Yotakera, "so when do I leave with my squad?" "Tonight," said Naruto as he showed Yotakera the live feed from the satellite that showed Suna was already under attack as they spoke. "Since Suna will fall soon enough. I am going to go to Wave right now. They were a bit slower to attack there, but the place does not have a strong military of any sort, so they really wouldn't be seen as a threat." "Will do, Commander," said Yotakera, as he nodded and left the war room to go get the men he would need to complete this mission. And he had just the right soldiers in mind. Naruto looked at the holographic screen once more as he saw the shinobi of Konoha reach the bridge that was named after him for freeing their country from the hands of the tyrant Gato. He sighed a bit in sadness since they were under attack once more, and what made it worse was it was from someone they thought were their allies, but weren't. So seeing that he didn't need the images up anymore, he waved them away and picked up his pilot helmet and looked at it. Last time when he had saved their country, he had been in a small group and underprepared for what was to come. Now he was far better prepared and would bring the right amount of people to save the villagers once more. As he donned his helmet and felt as it activated, he couldn't help but chuckle to himself. The last time he saved them they had named a bridge after him. Wonder what they will do to honor him this time around. Naruto and the dozen men who had come with him were all slowly making their way towards Wave Country, but in a manner you wouldn't expect. The issue here was that they were trying to be as stealthy as possible since the villagers had been all thrown into a gated area near the center of the village, but what made it worse was the seals they had on their persons. The seals were deadly in the sense they would explode if said person were to leave the gated area, kind of like a shock collar for a dog, but lethal given the seal was right in front of the heart. There were many wounds one could survive, but an exploded heart was not one of them. What made it worse was there was a manual kill switch as well, so Naruto and his group couldn't just go in guns blazing since the villagers would be killed if those from Konoha knew they were here to rescue them. Plus they needed the leader of the group Konoha sent here alive, since Naruto had to get the information they needed from said person. This made the mission all the more tricky since the village was on an island, so the only ways onto it were the bridge, which was guarded, the beach, which was also guarded, or the air. The last one wasn't really guarded, it was more the fact you can't really miss a large metallic dropship if one appeared so close to the village. So Naruto and the squad he was leading were using military-grade suction cups to crawl under the bridge itself. The seawater hitting the pillars of the bridge masked the sounds they would make as they crossed, and slowly they made their way near the end of the bridge. Once near the edge, Naruto used his hand to signal for the rest of the militia to stop. They listened to his orders, and as they did, Naruto whipped out a pulse blade. He stabbed upwards into the bridge with it and waited for a second. What the pulse blade does is send out a pulse that is invisible to the naked eye. This information would then be shown on the helmets of the members of the militia, thus marking the locations of their enemies. From what they could see, there were 4 shinobi guarding the bridge leading out of Wave. Apparently they weren't too worried about reinforcements of any kind. Naruto used his hand to tell those behind him that there were 4 enemies. He then motioned for them to silently go up and eliminate them, and to hide the bodies. The 2 men behind him simply nodded and pulled out their pistols before they attached silencers to them. They came prepared knowing full well that they would have to be quiet for the majority of this mission. The 2 militia members went ahead, and on the count of 3, they swung up onto the side of the bridge and crawled up enough to see their target. The shinobi never saw or heard their deaths coming since the sounds of the weapons were muffled. Those under the bridge heard the noise in their helmets that meant all clear, so they all followed suit and went topside. Naruto had his men drag the bodies to the edge of the bridge and then tossed over so they fell into the water below to rot. Naruto then motioned for his men to go different ways, with half of them going right while the other going left so as to eliminate any opposition hiding out in the rest of the village. While the majority of them were most likely in the center to keep watch over their prisoners, there would obviously be others elsewhere. The soldiers that all came with him all activated their cloaks, so as to come invisible and set off to do as ordered. Cloaks were perfect for this type of mission, but the issue with them was they could only be used in short bursts so they weren't just on permanently until you turn them off. Naruto activated his own cloak and used his grappling hook to get to the roofs of the nearest set of buildings. He needed to survey the citation and the roof provided the perfect place to do so. He kept to the shadows, which was easy given it was dusk with very little light around. Most of the light was near the center of town since the villagers were all there instead of their homes with the lights on. Eventually he made his way close enough to see who he was going against without being seen himself since he was lying down prone to avoid being seen. He saw the shinobi who were there, but he couldn't quite recognize all of them. A few he did, given they had tortured him so viciously in the past before he left the village, but the one he easily recognized was the one leading the group. Anko Mitarashi. Leave it to Konoha to give the job of enslaving peaceful villagers to the most sadistic bitch they had in their employ. Looking at her caused quite a few phantom pains to rise up in him given that woman had done some of the worst things to him. From what he could guess, she wasn't likened given she was the student of the trader's son in Orochimaru. This made her life suck, so she took her anger out on him since he was the only person hated more than herself and so no one would care. The tortures that woman inflicted upon his person were as numerous as they were excruciating to suffer through. But it seemed like the gods were giving him the chance to get justice for those times, and Kami as his witness he would not allow this chance to pass him by. Using his pulse blade once more, he stabbed the roof to see just where everyone was, and luckily for him they were all visible. Now came the question of just how to deal with this situation, but Naruto decided to go with the easiest answer of shock and awe. So, unsealing his smart pistol Mk6, he checked to make sure he had it fully loaded, which he did, and then hopped down from the roof and slowly made his way through a narrow alley towards a man sitting in front of it. With his other hand, he had his trust knife which he used to easily slit the unaware man's throat before kicking the body forward. This caused the expected effect of those who witnessed this to pause for a second since they were not expecting this. Here was a random stranger, brandishing a strange weapon in strange armor that looked far more advanced than the chakra armor Konoha had, which none of them were using since they were sent to subjugate a civilian village with no defenses. That was not what they expected in the slightest, and Naruto smirked as he opened fire with his pistol. The beauty about the smart pistol is the fact that it auto-locks onto the heads of his enemies, and so he was easily as well as effortlessly able to get a headshot to nearly all of them. The issue was that he only had 24 bullets, and there were 28 shinobi along with Anko making it 29. So when he ran out of bullets for his smart pistol, he sealed it away, which the other shinobi saw and tried to rush him. One threw a kunai, which just bounced off Naruto's armor since the thing was made of stronger metals, but as they got close, he whipped out his wingman and shot 3 of the charging shinobi in the face. He pointed towards the last one and pulled the trigger, but he heard the click that said the gun was empty, but even though the shinobi sighed a breath of relief since he had thought he would die from the strange weapon, Naruto still had his knife, which he stabbed into the man's neck, making the man fall forward as he tried to keep the blood from flowing out in vain. "Well, if it isn't the so-called snake whore of Konoha," said Naruto as he pulled out bullets and quickly reloaded his gun, all the while calling himself stupid over the fact he had not fully loaded it before the mission started. He always criticized the others over stupid mistakes in the simulator given he was their commander and all, but to do something this stupid himself only made him look even more idiotic. But well, to err is human. "Who the fuck are you?" demanded Anko, who was so shocked that those she was in charge were all dead so easily, and from one person no less. "I am hurt," said Naruto with a laugh. "After so much intimate private time together, Anko, I thought you of all people would remember me." "Wait, what?" asked Anko, who was more confused than she was before. While it was true she did have a casual fling with some random guy here or there, she never stayed with anyone for longer than one time. So what the hell was this guy talking about so much intimate time together? "I see you are confused," said Naruto as he pushed the side of his helmet, thus making the front rise up so she could see his face. It had been literally years since they last saw one another, but she recognized the Kyuubi brat just as soon as she saw his face. "You said Anko." "Yep," chuckled Naruto, "me. It is going to have a field day getting everything out of your head," said Anko with a smirk. She had not expected to see Naruto of all people here, but this would work out perfectly for her. Not only would she be able to torture the brat for quite some time until the others arrived, she would also get a promotion given she would be the one to hand over their weapon that all shinobi in the field were told to look out for. Not even Jiraiya had been able to find him with his expansive spy network, so this was perfect. And I can only hope that they let me torture you as they do. It will be like old times, you know, like those intimate moments you mentioned before. I am sure you would love nothing more than to hurt me in the sadistic fashion that you are accustomed to," stated Naruto with a smirk, "but you would have to capture me to actually get to do that, and look around you. You are alone since the others who came with you are all dead." "You might have killed these ones," said Anko in a haughty tone, seeing one of the shinobi who only faked being injured sneaked up behind Naruto. He had seen how his comrades had died and mimics theirs by falling down like they had when they were shot. "But I seriously doubt you killed all the ones in the village. We are shinobi, brat, we don't die so easily." The shinobi who was sneaking up behind him attempted to capture him from behind, but then there was a loud bang of a sound, and less than a second later the shinobi's body fell sideways with a massive hole in the side of his head and eyes that expressed just how confused he was about his death. He wasn't the only one since Anko was stumped right now. Naruto hadn't even moved and yet her comrade had died. The others had died fighting him, but he wasn't even aware of this one, so it didn't make any sense. "Oh really?" said Naruto with a laugh, mentally thanking whatever rifleman had taken the shot to cover his flank. He could have dealt with it, but this was better for the shock value of it all. Since he just died so easily. Anko at this point felt fear creep into her heart since there were so many variables to factor into this fight right now. Naruto obviously had help from others, which did not bode well for her since they managed to kill someone without making themselves seen. So since she had no other options, she bit her finger and slammed her hand hard onto the ground. The area was instantly covered in smoke, but once it disappeared a few seconds later there was a massive snake there. This was the eldest of Manda's children, the strongest snake summon Anko could summon herself. Only Orochimaru could summon Manda himself since he demanded sacrifices and Konoha was not going to provide them. "Cute toy you have there, brat," said Anko in the vain belief that this fight was over now. She had a summon while Naruto had been removed from the Toad summoning scroll by Jiraiya years ago. The pervy sage had gotten so much crap for doing that soon after Naruto left the village since Naruto couldn't just be reverse summon like he could have been if he had remained on the scroll. "But it won't do shit to my summon here." "True," said Naruto as he spun his wingman in his hand before holstering it. "But I have something that will." Naruto then pushed the side of his helmet to make it once more cover his entire face. The moment he did, out of literally nowhere, BT teleported in front of him kneeling while wielding the Ronin-class Titan loadout which consisted of a 3-barreled shotgun and a massive blade. Naruto spared not a second since the action of entering a Titan flawlessly was second nature to him by now after so much training. Once inside, BT turned around, brandishing the blade he had equipped. Naruto couldn't take the risk of a misfire hitting the hostages in the center of the village, who were understandably confused after seeing BT. "BT, always on time," said Naruto with a smirk. "I arrived as quickly as I have been programmed to pilot, Naruto," said BT. "That you did, but now is not a time to play around," said Naruto, who was right to say that. Anko had recovered from her shock faster than he had expected, and thus her giant snake, which was twice the size of BT, began to surround him. While she was still surprised to see such an advanced piece of technology that was even better than the armor she saw Naruto have, she would not give him the chance to use it against her. Hopefully those in Konoha could make sense of the remains after she dealt with it. She had her summon surround the metallic beast that Naruto controlled and then constrict itself quickly so the thing would be crushed. While a solid plan in execution, she was not fully aware of the things a Titan was capable of. Case in point. Naruto knew exactly what she was doing and waited until her summon tried to crush BT with him inside. The second it did, he slammed hard on a button that activated the electric smoke that all Titans had. It was used to get enemy pilots off of the Titan so they couldn't steal the main power core that was located on their back. It worked just as well against the giant snake since the creature was screaming in pain as it was paralyzed by the smoke. While the creature was in pain, BT phase dashed out of the center of the beast and swung his blade. Naruto had assumed that this would be enough, but the snake's skin was tougher than he had initially thought, so while it was bleeding given the sword did wound it, it wasn't fatal and thus it could still fight. The creature quickly overcame the pain it was in, which BT had only added to with the gash it now had near its head. It then spat out corrosive poison, but that didn't work as it had hoped since the materials BT was made of were made to persevere against the worst various worlds had to throw at him. So Naruto thought to end this now since if he didn't this thing could hurt the hostages in their fight. So he had BT charge up his blade with electricity for an arc wave and slashed the ground with it. Doing so caused a ball of electricity, which left a trail, to travel towards the snake. The thing was far too big for it to dodge the attack, and thus for the second time it was stunned due to the electrical nature of the attack. This time BT didn't try to cut the creature's head off, but turned the blade around in his hand and thrust it down hard into the snake's head, pinning it to the ground. BT then pulled out his shotgun and aimed it point blank at the creature before he pulled the trigger. With a loud bang, the creature's head was gone completely. Naruto saw it was dead and looked to his left to grab his kit that he put in BT beforehand. Inside was the fruits of his labor, which was now ready to be field tested fully, and Anko made the perfect test subject. BT opened up his hatch so that Naruto could hop out, which he did as he strapped another device onto the arm that he didn't already have his Void Walker device on already. It was easily snapped on, and once it was, he began to walk towards Anko, who at this point was at a loss for words given her trump card had just been eliminated so easily by something she had no idea what the hell it even was. She assumed it was a summon given it had appeared from thin air in front of her, but even if that was the case, just what the hell kind of summon did the brat manage to get his hands on? "So now that you have no one but yourself," said Naruto as he prepared to dodge any last-ditch attempts at defending herself that Anko would throw at him. "This is over." Anko growled in rage as she held out her hands towards him. From her sleeves came a massive stream of poisonous snakes that were ready to bite him and inject him with enough venom to end him in seconds of doing so. Naruto simply smirked as he then began to sprint towards her. As the snakes got close, he then slid under them flawlessly. Given agility like this was lesson 101 being a pilot. Anko was shocked to see him dodge her attack, but she was at a loss on what to do since she had left herself wide open doing what she had done. Naruto capitalized on her error by whipping out his wingman and shooting her in both arms, and if that wasn't enough, he shot her left kneecap as well, so she fell down onto her other knee screaming in agony. "Well, that was a slight bit of entertainment," said Naruto simply, "but now you are going to give me the information I want." "Go to fucking hell, brat," said Anko painfully as she tried to do just about anything to fight back. But the shots Naruto had taken had fully taken her arms out of commission, so she was literally defenseless right now. "I won't tell you shit." "I never said you would," replied Naruto with a chuckle. "I said you would give me the information I wanted." Completely different. His response confused Anko, which surprised her that he had yet to cease to do that. But that confusion was only amplified tenfold when out of Naruto's arm appeared what could only be described as a digital blade of some sort. He then thrust the blade upwards so that it pierced through the bottom of her jaw all the way into her brain. Anko was making gurgling sounds as her body was succumbing to her injury, but then electricity caused her to scream in a muffled fashion as she felt herself lose her memories at such a rapid pace. By the time she finally died from whatever weapon Naruto had used, she didn't even remember who the hell she was and died not knowing. To clarify what Naruto had used, it was a device he had spent the last several months putting together. Naruto was for all purposes a genius when it came to technology, which is why he was easily able to complete the Void Walker gear he now used when others had failed or stopped for some reason or another. He had gotten so good by being forced to fix just about everything he owned his entire childhood. The various groups of villagers would always break into his apartment and attack him, but to add a full metric ton of salt on the wound they would break pretty much everything he had. Since he couldn't keep getting new stuff given he had neither the money to do so nor would the shopkeepers even sell their wares to him given they hated him so damn much, he learned to scrounge for parts and fix things through trial and error. Over the years he got good at it, and now here he was using technology far better than he had ever used before. The years living in New Angel City only helped to grow his mind to the genius levels they were now, which mixed with the tactical mind he had from years of simulated battles, and he was a force of nature to be reckoned with. While he was tinkering in his spare time, he would always think up random ideas, many of which he wrote down to come back to in the future. But he had wondered at one point if it was possible to extract information from the human mind in a way you could see it like a video. In a world full of war and betrayal, it would be best to get the true facts from a person given people lied even under torture. So he had begun research as well as the construction of a device he could use to extract said information out of his enemies. The results were a device he called the Skulljack, since like an electrical plug-in he jacked the blade straight into their skull to get at their brain. What it did was upon piercing into the brain of the enemy, it would use electricity to siphon the memories of the victims so that they could be categorized and filed for later observation, or to be observed by the pilot who wielded the device like he was doing right now. Anko had been the first one he had ever used it on since the device killed whoever he used it on. And right now he was using it to see if there was a counter to the seals that had been put on the villagers of Wave. It took a good 5 minutes, but he eventually found it in her various memories. It made him question just why the hell people who went out of their way to make a seal to threaten and enslave the populace would make a counter to said seal, but he was just going to chalk it up to them being cautious about if the seal was ever used on them. The hand seals he needed to make to release them were numerous, but he was nothing if not good at replicating the ones he saw from Anko's memories. "Big bro," shouted Inari as he was one of the first people to rush out of the fenced-off area the second Naruto shot the lock off. He had no idea where the key was, and he was too lazy to look for it, so he just went this route. "Inari," said Naruto as he was hugged by the young man. It had been so long since the two of them had seen each other, with the last time being when he had fled Konoha and used a henge to hide his appearance. The kid was no longer the scrawny, downer of a child he remembered from the past. "Are you all right?" "They killed my mother and grandfather," said Inari sadly. They had killed Tajuna since the elderly man had tried to get the people to stand up so as to not once again be put in the same situation as when Geto was in charge, so he was eliminated to let the others know that they weren't playing around. Tsunami though, she had just been randomly chosen along with several others to be executed to solidify the fear into the hearts of the people. And it had worked given the people were all sealed up and imprisoned in this gated area until the time when the newer seals could be applied that would enslave the people to Konoha's will. "It's going to be alright, Inari," said Naruto as he patted the kid on the head as a form of reassurance. He then talked into his helmet's mic after turning on the comms to see how things were elsewhere. He was given the all-clear by the others who had come with him, since the other Konoha shinobi had all been eliminated. "But we can catch up in a bit. Ladies and gentlemen of Wave, I need your attention." The people who he had saved all looked at him since he had gotten their attention with his statement. "I need all of you to quickly go to your homes and collect anything you consider of value in any sense. Whether it be of actual value, or just personal value given some memory, please gather everything as soon as you can and come back here." "Why must we go about collecting our belongings?" asked a random villager, with many vocally agreeing with him. While Naruto was a hero to them twice over, given he had saved them from both Geto as well as Konoha, they weren't just going to give up everything of value on a silver platter to him. "Simple," said Naruto with a sigh. "My plan is to evacuate you all from here to a safe location. Once we are far enough, I am going to detonate a bomb that will destroy this entire village." "Why the hell would you destroy our homes like that?" demanded another villager. "Because Konoha will come back," said Naruto, "but with not only greater numbers so as to not fail in enslaving you a second time, but will take all your valuables from you by force to fund their war campaign across the elemental continent. This way, they will assume you are all dead and not hunt you down. Plus you get to keep your belongings. I am not taking them." There was a long silence after he said his piece, and it came to the point that Naruto actually questioned if they would be willing to abandon the village to save their lives. But eventually, one mother moved towards her home with her 5-year-old daughter to do as he asked. Once she hurried off, the rest soon followed suit. As Naruto waited for the people to gather their belongings, the rest of the riflemen who came with him appeared to report in. To think that it only took a dozen men to secure an entire village, but given their technological advances it made sense. Soon enough, the villagers started to come back with bags filled with the things they wished to bring. As Naruto saw the majority of the people return, he opened his comms to call in the dropship to transport the people. As was the norm, the people gawked at the technology they were presented with before them, which Naruto knew they would be only more surprised once they got to New Angel City since everyone was. They saw the back open up, but had to wait for a bit as Naruto told a few of his men to unload the payload and set it up in the center of town. The bomb was then lifted out of the dropship and put in the gated area since it was the center of the village. His men began to set it up, with Naruto seeing the villagers begin boarding the ship. As the numbers began to thin, he ordered the men not setting up the bomb to go out and double-check that no one else was there. 10 minutes later, he was given the all-clear and then the men returned. Those in charge of the bomb came back over as well while one of them handed him the detonator to the bomb. Since everything as well as everyone was accounted for, Naruto boarded the ship himself and pushed the button to seal the door up. He stood there as the ship lifted off, and waited approximately 30 seconds before he smirked and clicked the button on the detonator. While those inside the ship could neither hear or see the explosion, those miles away from Wave were easily able to see or hear it. And for a few unlucky merchants who were near the shoreline in boats, they felt the shockwave. The blast completely obliterated Wave Village off the face of the map, but it was a simple sacrifice to thwart Konoha for a time. This way they would have to not only open up the various mines that had been blasted shut from the shockwave, they now didn't have a slave labor force to collect materials for them. This would put them behind schedule a bit, but not for too long given their plans elsewhere. As Naruto stood there, he could only wonder how Utakara was doing in his own mission. But given he was a Jinchuriki like him, down to the military training as well as the pilot training to back him up, he could only grin since he knew 6 would not fail. It was the dead of night as the large group of people who once made up the village of Suna were forced to walk through the desert. They were all chained at the wrists, with those who were shinobi forced to wear chakra-suppressing cuffs so that they didn't put up any sort of fight as they were forced to march. Even if they could fight, they wouldn't have been able to do much since they had been in a battle not too long ago and their energy was depleted from trying to defend their homes from the very people who were forcing them to march like this. At the front of the line was none other than the former Kazekage himself, Gaara, who had far more seals on his person to keep him detained as well as far more shinobi to put him down if the need should arise. But just like the others, Gaara wouldn't have fought back if he had the chance. He was broken on the inside since he had lost so much in a short amount of time, with his own siblings being executed in front of him at the hands of none other than Minato Namikaze himself, the so-called father of his only friend Naruto. Speaking of his friend, he had heard from his sources that Naruto had fled Konoha for some reason and was now in the bingo book as a missing nin. Minato had stated that it was because Naruto had committed treason, but Gaara was no fool. Both Gaara and Naruto were Jinchuriki and so he knew the pains that his brother in burden had to go through since he himself had suffered like that for so long. It was Naruto himself who broke him out of his homicidal mindset, and to hear that his friend fled his home village only told him that while he himself had acquired the respect of the people in Suna as he took the mantle of Kazekage, Naruto was still hated within his one village. No Jinchuriki would simply abandon their village, more out of fear since they would be hunted by all sorts of people ranging from shinobi in their own village to the shinobi of others who wanted another weapon at their own disposal. Gaara could only hope that Naruto found peace wherever he might end up, and given he had heard nothing more about his friend, neither good nor bad made him truly question if he ever achieved said peace. The attack had come out of nowhere, and it aggravated him that he had been so blind to the fact that their own allies would betray them like this. Suna had done the same thing, so why wouldn't Konoha if given the chance? He had been in a meeting with a few of his umbu when he was told of the large force of enemies headed their direction, and what made it worse was they had flying ships of all things, which made Gaara question if what his shinobi had seen was a mirage. But the man had been completely accurate in the description of what he had seen. Gaara had mobilized his troops to the main gate, with the rest of the people fleeing to the shelters. The plan was to bottle their enemies through the one entrance, but that wasn't how things panned out. Turned out that some of the shinobi that were in charge of maintaining the seals of the walls that protected Suna had turned traitor and had altered the seals for this exact moment. So instead of there being one opening into the village, there were now several large gaps in the wall. Konoha shinobi stormed through these freshly made gaps and began to slaughter all in their way. The forces of Suna were shocked to see Konoha not only attacking them like this, but their armor they wore made it exponentially harder to fight against them. Their jutsu were mainly negated when they hit their target, and the few they could actually kill were by blades through the areas the armor didn't cover. Gaara himself killed quite a few of the invading forces, but he was quickly brought to his knees as he was bound in chakra chains conjured up by Kushina Uzumaki herself so that her husband could place the seals needed to keep him contained. Gaara screamed in rage as he struggled to break free, but his strength was being sapped quickly by the chains and he lacked the strength to do so. Without Gaara leading the charge as their trump card, since his ability to command sand was essential here in the defense of their home, the forces of Suna were slowly defeated. They put up a valiant fight, but Konoha had come prepared to counter most of their heavy hitters and eliminated them first so that their chances of winning decreased rapidly. Gaara was forced to watch as Minato ordered one of his shinobi to use his abilities to control wood, almost like the first Hokage himself, to set up a stage in the center of their village and bring citizen after citizen of Suna forward onto it before having them killed off by hanging them. The imagery of his people being hung before his eyes was still fresh in his mind. He remembered as the man who led them stood off to the side of the stage, standing above all his shinobi like he was some sort of god amongst them. The man had such an inflated ego of himself that Gaara was easily able to see, but then came the shinobi who spoke up and said the words that Minato wanted him to say. By the order of the Yondaime Hokage Yellow Flash Namikaze Minato, you are all hereby charged with treason against the great village of Konoha, with the punishment for your crimes being death by hanging. In the process of sacking Suna, any rights you may have possessed when it comes to the laws of the village are by Minato's command officially suspended, said the Umbu commander as he stood atop the makeshift stage in front of all the prisoners. There were so many since Konoha had been thorough with capturing those hidden away in the village. While he spoke his words, the first group of Suna's citizens marched up to the nooses now wrapped around their necks. Before, with the simple pull of the lever next to the commander, the ground was dropped out from under them, ending their lives in a manner they did not deserve, for they were no traitors. The right to have an assembly suspended, said the Umbu commander before he pulled the lever again after another group of people were strung up in nooses. The right to a trial suspended, said the Umbu commander before another line of people fell to their hanging. The people were crying out for them to spare their loved ones such a fate, but Konoha did not come here to make peace. They had come to conquer Suna in one fell swoop, and they planned to instill the fear of defeat so deep in their minds that never again would the notion of challenging Konoha would arise within it. It didn't matter how many people they had to kill, the citizens of Suna would be broken no matter how many lives had to be killed off to do so. The right to legal counsel and be tried by a jury of your peers suspended, said the Umbu commander before yet another line of people fell to a quick death. What made this next row of people worse was that they were all children. None of them any more than 7 at most, but even they were strung up and prepared to suffer the same fate that those before them had. The right to appeal sentencing suspended, said the Umbu commander, as the people heard the necks of the children snap as they fell from their platform, and then tossed into the slowly growing pile of dead people. With their deaths, true despair sunk into their hearts deep. While the piles of dead bodies were growing with various people of all ages, they did spare about 20% of the village. Those they spared were shinobi with unique skills as well as able-bodied citizens who were in their teens to adulthood. All of the elderly were killed. All of the sick and feeble were killed. They even killed all children who were not from a clan since they were of no use to them. They wanted their slaves to be put to work immediately and didn't care to wait for the children to grow up into their slave force. The next generation would be born enslaved, and that was the way Konoha wanted it. Hours went by with the piles of bodies being burned, with more being thrown onto the now ablaze pile to get rid of them, and it finally ended with Gaara's own family, both Kankuro as well as Temari being killed. Gaara had been restrained by Kushina herself with her chakra chains, as well as her forcing his eyes open and his head towards them on the gallows. So he couldn't look away from what was going to happen. "Konoha will pay for this betrayal," had been their final words, with Kankuro spitting in Minato's face. Minato had not taken that action lightly and quite literally strangled Kankuro to death with his bare hands before he pulled the lever to drop Temari himself. Gaara wept loudly as he heard the snap of the rope breaking her neck. It had taken so many years for him and his siblings to get along since he was a bloodthirsty Jinchuriki with madness caused by insomnia. But he had gotten better after his defeat by his best friend's hands and became a loving family. Now all that was for naught since Minato had personally ended their lives. Now here he was, being marched off while heavily subdued to what he assumed would be his death. They didn't need him, they wanted the Biju he held and were just using him as a shipping container for it until said time where they could extract it from him. The others he knew would be either enslaved or bred so that their children would have their parents' various bloodlines, and then they would be enslaved as well. The one in charge of the escorting detail was Kakashi himself. The man had been tasked with bringing the prisoners back so as to begin placing the seals to enslave the masses, and he did so proudly since his sensei had trusted him with this task personally. He had about 100 others with him, along with Yamato for support. Yamato was one of Orochimaru's experiments that had actually succeeded by splicing him with the DNA of the first Hokage so as to be able to wield the wood conjuring jutsu the now deceased leader once did. While not as powerful as the original itself, it still was powerful enough to do the job as well as being able to restrain a Biju if needed, hence why he was here now so that on the off chance Gaara attempted to break free of his restraints he could be subdued. But unknown to them, in the distance, far off to the point one could not see with their naked eye alone, a small group was hidden away just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Yotakata and his crew were the best marksmen in all the militia. Each and every one of them were handpicked by him personally to become the elite snipers within their forces. The only one who wasn't among them was Naruto, but that was because he was the commander and thus led them all. Naruto wasn't the best sniper, since that spot was taken by Yotakata, but he was at least the fourth. Even if he wasn't the best, he was a jack-of-all-trades kind of guy who was proficient in all weapons as well as good enough to be within the top 10 users of said weapon. That was far more impressive than just mastering one to become the best. They had set out under the cover of night in a fairly large airship that was used to transport vehicles and/or Titans to and from the field. True Titans did have the ability to teleport to their destination, but vehicles could not, at least for the moment, but in the future that might change if needed. They were using the technology of others, so give them a break. Naruto had always known that one day Konoha would invade Suna, which only showed his prowess as a tactician since he was several moves ahead of you. He had designed as well as had built the vehicles they were currently using right now. They were sand-colored hover vehicles that ran silent. They were designed for stealth in every sense of the word. For those who saw them, they would just assume they were oddly shaped rocks of some sort and not give them a second look. But even if they did, they had no idea that such advanced technology existed, so they wouldn't be able to guess what it truly was. They had about 24 of them, each piloted by a MIRV since there were only a dozen snipers here to keep their numbers small. They needed them to get the prisoners they saved away from here and towards the airship to get them back to New Angel City. The desert had nothing to hide in. Sure, there were sandstorms, but those played hell with the guidance systems, so their pilots would be screwed if they tried to fly in one. So airships, which were a technological marvel even with the ones Konoha used, stood out so much that it was nearly impossible to not notice them if they flew by. They had to land theirs, which there were 3 of since the vehicles they carried were large, on the borders of Wind Country. They were well hidden since it was the dead of night, and yet time was still a factor here since every moment they spent here was another that their airships could be randomly seen by someone. So now that their targets were nearing the point that they would begin their assault, Yotakata and his men prepped their rifles for the slaughter that was going to begin shortly. As they did that in the distance, Kakashi and his men were all riding on the high of winning such a decisive victory against their opponent. It didn't matter that Suna didn't really have a chance since they didn't expect their allies to betray them out of the blue like this. They had been idiots for not expecting it, and now their village had fallen. Minato and the rest were securing the town and scouring it for any and all valuable info that they could get, such as jutsu and medical knowledge. But their so-called good times were about to end suddenly. "Did anyone else hear a distant pop-like sound?" asked one of the shinobi near the front of the escort. No one else was able to answer him though, or even if they did he wouldn't have heard it since the man fell back as the bullet he had heard fired from a distance hit him square in the forehead, killing him instantly. "What the hell just happened?" demanded Kakashi, who was confused about what they had just seen. There was no one anywhere near them, and their prisoners were all still restrained, so this wasn't them attacking. So that only left them with one viable answer. "Umbu," was all Kakashi was able to shout before his words got all garbled up. The reason for that had been a bullet had gone right through his neck, thus making it impossible for him to speak properly. Hell, he couldn't even scream without it sounding like some sort of garbled mess. "Kakashi," shouted Yamato as he conjured up a protective barrier surrounding the two of them out of wood. Yamato kneeled down to see what he could do, but the damage was not something he knew personally how to help with. Sure, shinobi were supposed to know how to patch themselves up in the field so as to not die if injured, but this went way beyond a simple wound to patch up. Yamato heard the sounds that the first shinobi had heard before his death. He heard the men outside his barrier try to make some sort of defensive perimeter, yet they were failing to do so. A few, the last ones in fact, had the decent idea to try and use prisoners as human shields. But even that plan failed since Yotakata had two of his men circle around to snipe out anyone who did just that, and his plan went without a hitch, with the now only two remaining shinobi in the escort detail being Yamato as well as Kakashi himself, who was barely hanging on as it was. Yotakata got close to the makeshift barrier and smirked as he pulled out a half-dozen throwing stars. He hopped up towards the open top of the barrier, but he cloaked before he did so the two inside didn't see him as he did. Once above them, he saw Yamato with his hand over the bullet wound on Kakashi's neck to try and stem the blood flow, freaking out trying to come up with some sort of plan to survive, while Kakashi was visibly on his last leg. None of the training that they had gone through both in the field as well as in the academy had prepared them for this moment. Neither of them saw Yotakata throw the shuriken towards them, so they didn't dodge in time as they were pierced by them, yet that wasn't even the worst part. What Yotakata threw were called fire stars, and what they were thermite grenades in a more agile form of projectile. So seconds after they hit, the weapons ignited, setting Yamato as well as Kakashi ablaze, with Yamato screaming to the heavens while Kakashi was incapable of doing so. Since their enemies had been dealt with, Yotakata ordered his men to secure the perimeter to make sure there were no other shinobi from Konoha coming their way. As they did that, several of those who remained pulled out their personal multi-tools and began the process of freeing the prisoners from their bindings. "Gaara, I take it," said Yotakata as he walked up to the man himself, who looked at his savior with a confused look on his face. Here stood a man clad in strange, yet advanced-looking armor who had managed to kill the people who were marching them towards slavery. It took his mind a bit to process all this. "I am," said Gaara finally. "Who are you and why did you save us?" "I am Yotakata, captain within the ranks of the militia," said Yotakata simply, since that was all that needed to be said to answer the first question. "What is the militia?" asked Gaara, who was confused since he had never heard of such a group. He wondered if they were going to be like the Akatsuki that he had heard about. He was told by his spies that Suna was going to be attacked by them a while back, but said attack never happened and he questioned why that was. His spy network was very good at what it did. All your questions will be answered soon, said Yotakata as he pulled out a multi-tool. It was basically a far more advanced Swiss Army knife. Now hold still, this is going to take a bit to get these off you. Yotakata pulled out what was a miniature blowtorch of sorts and used it to cut the cuffs off of Gaara's hands. The materials used to make them were tough, so it took a bit longer than expected. While he was doing that, he had one of his men go and collect something that Naruto had sent with him. By the time Gaara was freed from his binds, the man had returned with a large metallic suitcase-looking device. "What is that?" asked Gaara, who was only getting more confused by the second as he kept seeing more and more things that he had never seen or heard of before. The only reason he didn't attempt to attack Yotakata and his men the second he was free was that curiosity alone. He saw that the men who had come with him had not attempted to rebind the others from Suna or even have any sort of aggressive behavior. In fact, he saw several of them offering up medical services to those who needed it along with water and something to eat, which wasn't much since it was just jerky, but it did wonders for an empty stomach. "This device will scan you of all the seals placed on your body to subdue you and erase them," said Yotakata as he placed the device on the ground and clicked it open. Once open, a circular device opened up that was 3 times as big as the case it was inside. Gaara was curious about that, but there were seals that allowed people to carry absurdly large items in small scrolls, so it wasn't too far of a stretch to see this done a different way. "So if you would be so kind as to step onto the device so that we can get the process started." "And how do I know that this isn't some elaborate plan to enslave me?" asked Gaara. He was of sound mind right now and he knew that with every great offer there was some sort of catch to it. "Now why the hell would we go through all this?" asked Yotakata as he spread his arms to emphasize the others who had come with him as well as all the damage they had done to the Konoha shinobi, "if we were simply going to capture you all over again." "To make it so Konoha couldn't track you," said Gaara simply. Yotakata laughed at his response since Naruto had warned him about this. Yotakata had called bullshit on knowing the exact words someone would use, and even bet money on it. "Damn it," said Yotakata as he calmed himself, "I owe Naruto money now. Seems as though he knows you way too well." "Wait a second," said Gaara in surprise to hear his friend's name, "did you say Naruto?" "Indeed I did," said Yotakata, "since he was the one who sent us to aid you in your escape." "So he is alive," said Gaara softly, since it was more to himself. "Yes he is," said Yotakata, "and the sooner you get on the device so we can get those seals off you, the sooner you can see him in person." "Very well then," said Gaara as he stepped onto the metallic circle in front of him. As soon as he stepped on it, it activated. It sent a pulse of electricity to keep him in place, and then a thin black screen shot up to conceal him from everyone. Once hidden away, several red rings of energy scanned his body up and down. One by one the rings sent pulses through him that erased one seal after another. The process was rather painful, but with the pain came his strength once more since he was less confined by the seals. After about 5 minutes, all the seals were gone, and Gaara was so happy that they were. "Well, it seems like everything is alright," said Yotakata as the black screen retracted back into the device. Gaara stepped off the thing and the device then shrank back up, and then the container closed itself, which once it did Yotakata picked it back up for transport. "So now we need to head out as soon as possible. There is no telling just when the rest of the shinobi from Konoha will arrive. But before we go, can you do me a favor?" One Jinchuriki to another. That last statement caused Gaara to pause since he didn't expect to hear that out of all things. While the person who had led the troops who saved them had tech none of them had seen before in their lives, he hadn't really used a jutsu or anything chakra related, so he wouldn't have guessed that Yotakata was one of the most powerful of shinobi due to the demon sealed within him. "You are a Jinchuriki?" asked Gaara. "Yes." "Which do you hold?" "I hold Seiken, the 6-tailed beast." but more on that later. Right, said Gaara as he understood that time was of the essence here, so what do you need me to do? We need to throw the forces of Konoha off our scent here, said Yotakata, so we need you to use your ability to control sand to bury all this. The bodies, the chains, everything that we are not taking with us, we need you to bury so deep that even the best tracker nin that Konoha have won't catch a scent of it. That I can do, said Gaara with a smirk, since it was not only something he could do, but it was something he would take pleasure in doing as well. This way, none of those who attacked his home would ever be returned to Konoha for a proper burial. They had hung so many of Suna's former citizens and then burned the bodies, so this was karmic justice in his mind. The troops of the militia herded the people towards the vehicles that were now coming towards them, and as they cleared the area, Gaara called upon the power he possessed to cause the sand to turn into one massive sinkhole. By the time he was done, there was no trace that anything had ever come this way in the first place. Once done, he joined the others and saw as what they thought at first were oddly shaped moving rocks of some sort open up and showed that the insides were far more advanced than they had initially thought. Once everyone was inside, the vehicles all set off away from the immediate area towards the outskirts of Wind Country. Once there, they boarded the airship and set off towards New Angel City, where they all would begin their training to become members of the militia. Gaara and the survivors of Suna had all entered the city of New Angel City in the exact manner that all before them had. They took 2 steps off the airship and then froze at the technological marvels that they now found themselves surrounded by. It was always a lot to take in the first time, so those who resided there understood their reaction and gave them the few moments they needed to come to terms with it. Naruto had been there personally to greet them since he was still at the airfield with the group of people he had saved from Wave. Gaara had been more than happy to see his friend still alive after all this time, and even more so that he had once again saved him. While the first time had been more of saving him from himself, it was still saving him nonetheless. Naruto had shook his hand and told him that he was sorry for Gaara about his loss. Once everyone was off the airship, Naruto went into his speech about how things worked here. He told them their plans, which eventually everyone came to not only understand but accept as well. Then they set out to find a home for themselves in the still numerous empty houses that were all around the place. The next day, they were all in learning pods so as to begin to understand just how everything worked, and had been doing so for the past few weeks. Some, if not most really, decided to join up with the militia forces themselves and soon began the extensive training that followed, with many wanting to become pilots themselves. Yet only several people had actually qualified, with Inari being the only pilot they had on record at the moment who used a Northstar-class Titan. Those were the only models capable of flight since they were smaller than the rest. They weren't as heavily armored, but they were far more agile, so it made up for the armor loss. Gaara didn't care to become a pilot, nor even a member of the militia really. What he wanted was to become a farmer. This surprised many, but Naruto understood his reasons. Gaara had spent so many years being seen as some sort of mindless homicidal freak of nature and only recently got over that mindset. He had tried to keep his home safe and failed in such a manner that so many had been killed due to his inability to protect him. His mind was screaming at him to kill, but he was afraid that once that dam broke there would be no coming back this time around, so instead of giving in to his rage, he chose a more peaceful occupation so as to calm his mind. Besides, it wasn't like the militia was short on military might, given they had plenty of people within their ranks. While the members of the militia were accepting as well as training their newest citizens/troops, Konoha had finally finished their business within Wind Country. Their forces had infiltrated and killed the Wind Daimyo as well as his family the same way that they had killed those in Suna, via hanging in a public place. Once the selective genocide of their people was over, the people they chose to keep as slaves were sent back. Imagine their surprise when they got back and learned that the first group never made it back with not only their slaves, but their future weapon as well. Minato had so many trackers out in Wind Country to try and find some trail they could follow to capture them all over again, but there was nothing. No trace no matter where they looked for it. So in the end they thought that once again that their enemies had fled west since they weren't hidden anywhere else given their spies had seen none of them and they were in every country. But as they prepared themselves for the next invasion, Naruto had set out to meet an old friend who himself was actually trying to flee west like the people he heard were doing so. The irony here was that none of the people Konoha thought were actually doing that. The old friend in question? Itachi Uchiha. Itachi was a man who wanted peace since he was tired of fighting. Fighting was all his family did through the generations as did all others in clans and by this point he was sick of it. But the gods had been cruel to him and blessed him with the skills that made him a prodigy amongst his own clan and thus his dreams of a peaceful life were shattered since he was now put on a high pedestal that he could never get off since people kept him there. Itachi actually envied those of the Nara clan, since they were intelligent but lazy, and they got away with it. Yet he was intelligent and was never allowed to stop. When the order to kill his family had come to him, he had at first been against it, but he thought about it and actually wondered if he could achieve his dream if they were gone since without his clan in the picture he wouldn't be on such a high pedestal anymore, so he was all for it in the end. Plus if the Uchiha had actually succeeded in their coup, then his workload would only have gotten worse since Uchiha are greedy and would not stop until everyone was under their control. So Itachi did the deed, thinking that his life would get easier, but no. Now he was told to become a spy for them and infiltrate the ranks of the group known as the Akatsuki. So without much choice, given his deed of killing his family was now known to the entirety of the elemental continent, he did as he was ordered to once again. And there he stayed until he had had enough. As he heard about Konoha finally making their move and conquering the land, he also heard about his brother's death. This made him groan since his future plan was now ruined. You see, Itachi didn't really care about Sasuke. Sasuke was just like the rest of the former Uchiha in the mindset that he had to be the strongest and so he wouldn't stop training to become so. Itachi was the polar opposite of that. He was lazy and simply wanted to live a quiet life and yet he was their strongest without even trying. He cursed that fact and wished time after time that Sasuke could just take that skill from him and be done with it, yet that wasn't possible. Now that Sasuke was dead, he knew that Konoha would demand that he breed other Uchiha for them to use in the future, and he didn't want his family to be used like that. While he didn't care about the others of his clan, he wouldn't allow his own children to become pawns. So since he knew what fate awaited him if he remained, he packed what he needed and abandoned the mission and left the Akatsuki. To his surprise though, he ran into Naruto of all people on his journey. The reason Naruto considered Itachi a friend was that out of all the people in the village, he was the only one who had been genuinely nice to him. There had been no ulterior motive or fake niceties, since it had all been genuine. Sure, Itachi knew who he was, but he was the type of person to judge someone by their actions and so far Naruto hadn't really done anything to him personally so he didn't hate him. Hell, he had even gotten Naruto some things he needed such as medkits and food, which other Umbu reported back to Hiruzen, which then got him kicked out of Naruto's supervisory detail. So since Itachi had been so helpful to him in the past, Naruto offered him a place to finally settle down without having to fight anymore. And without hesitation, Itachi took the offer and went with him. And as Itachi joined those learning in the pods, the higher-ups of the militia all watched and waited for Konoha to win their war, all the while knowing that in the end their victory would be hollow. Naruto, as well as the higher-ranking members of the militia, had grossly overestimated Konoha's ability to win their war quickly. Sure, in the end they had done the deed and won with the other villages suffering the same fates as Suna did, but by Kami they were so slow about it. Naruto and the others had assumed that they would press the advantage and keep going, but they took their time and caused internal issues that were small things alone that weakened their opponents without giving them the proper time to recover from it in time for the assault on their homes. Those who were able to escape were recovered by Naruto and his forces, who extracted them to New Angel City, and after the usual coming to terms with such a highly advanced place, they would then begin their own sessions within the learning pods. Many joined the ranks of the military itself, but some didn't, since they weren't fighters and instead learned to be other things such as chefs and mechanics as well as doctors. Someone had to heal the soldiers that came back hurt. Once more, Konoha just assumed that those who were missing were just fleeing west to escape them. They did try and put up some outposts to try and stop those who would flee that way, but that was just a waste of resources that they would need elsewhere to finalize their victory within the elemental continent. Given the fact that no one was fleeing west, not that they actually knew that, it was a smart decision on their part really. Eventually they even managed to eliminate the forces of the Akatsuki as well, who at this point actually became a mercenary force so as to kill two birds with one stone. They could earn money as well as gather the biju from their vessels. But their plans failed since their leader died from his illness too soon, since his body had been deteriorating for so long and couldn't handle it anymore, and the others, while powerful, were killed since Konoha studied and planned against them extensively. So now a major group was wiped off the board in this war. So while the power of Konoha grew until it consumed the entirety of the elemental continent, the militia grew in numbers as well. Naruto gave each new group they brought into the fold the same speech about waiting until the enemy showed itself in full, and how that would only happen when they assumed complete victory. And group by group they listened to his words, since they knew alone they couldn't do anything, since even when they had the full force of their villages they still failed because there were so many internal problems that Konoha not only caused but capitalized on to defeat them. So the learning pods were functioning throughout all hours of the day, both day and night, as the people learned to live in their new home. And in those 3 years, Naruto did come up with a very radical plan for the future. One that he actually questioned himself on whether people would go for it or not. So he called his captains to the war room and told them his idea. The idea was simple really. A chakra inhibitor, one that could be implanted into everyone. That way, no more jutsu could be used, but they wouldn't die from the lack of it either. It would be made so that chakra wasn't passed down into the next generation, so that they no longer were dependent on it like their generation was currently, since it was so seeped into their systems. Obviously many, if not most of those in attendance were against this, given it stripped them of so much of their strength, yet Naruto planned on this course of reasoning. He explained that in the last 100 years alone, there had been 4 major shinobi wars over the dumbest of reasons. Both men and women were captured and raped so as to breed more people with their bloodlines, so as to make a formidable force for the future, like what Konoha was doing right now. They had slaughtered everyone who didn't have some bloodline or strong genetics within them, since they saw those without them as weak. Very hypocritical of them to think that way, given a large portion of their village fell under that category, yet they were evil dictatorial assholes. So he wanted a future where no one was being captured so as to suffer such a horrific fate, and the only way to make it happen was to make it so that chakra died with their generation, so that the next didn't have such targets on their backs. After he had said his piece and laid out his reasons for wanting to go that route, he waited for their replies. For several tense minutes, they sat there in silence as they pondered on whether or not to follow through with Naruto's plan or not. No one knew what to say or do right now, since something like this had never been asked before. Sure, there were seals to make someone incapable of using chakra, but those were reserved for prisoners and they didn't get a choice on the matter. Naruto was offering a choice as well as sound logic to the matter. But eventually the silence was broken, and surprisingly it had been Itachi himself who spoke up. While not a captain himself, given he had come to New Angel City to get away from the fighting, he was still at the meeting as a friend, one that Naruto didn't kick out. Itachi mentioned how his life as a shinobi had been utter hell, with the constant pressure of following in the footsteps of his ancestors weighing on him constantly, with everyone calling him a prodigy of all things and only adding to the weight of it all. He sacrificed so much for his home only to see his family fall to ruin on the orders of the higher-ups, and even his attempts at redemption had been ruined by them. He had fought his battles and now simply wanted peace, yet given he was an Uchiha, there would never be any sort of peace since there would always be someone who coveted his eyes like many had before. If the chakra inhibitor could in fact eliminate his bloodline so that he could one day have a family of his own, one where he wouldn't have to worry that they would be taken from him to be either harvested for their eyes or used as breeding tools to make more of them, then he would not hesitate to use it. His words hit home to the others in the meeting, and one by one they all agreed that it was for the best. So with that out in the open, the word spread of the newest project that several of their brightest minds were working on. The people were exactly the same way as the captains were when they first heard of the idea, but once again just like the captains they listened to the logic of it all and accepted the idea and would go for it to spare their future generations any sort of problems bloodlines could have. It took some time, with much trial and error which thankfully never ended in a fatality, but eventually the chakra inhibitors were made. They were a simple small chip-like device that was injected into the back of the neck that would then attach itself to the spine and siphon the chakra so one could no longer access the means to activate jutsu or bloodlines through it. Naruto, as well as Utakata and Gaara, were the first to get the implant, but they also had to go through another step as well to make it work. While the others were working on the inhibitors, Naruto fashioned 9 separate energy tanks, each clearly labeled with a number from 1 to 9. They were made to house the Biju that all 3 of them had at the moment as well as the others when they dealt with them in the future. All 3 of them said their goodbyes to the demon that had been their companion for so long, but then they were hooked up to the device that extracted them in a manner that they didn't die from it. The Biju now lay dormant inside their tanks, but within it they were put into a simulation of their own shaping so they were happy. Each of them had their own new world to live and roam around in, with Shikaku rampaging through various places as he was the most destructive of the Biju. Seiken simply explored the world his mind made a reality and enjoyed the sights. Kurama though, he was the most attached to his vessel out of all the Biju. In his world, he stuck by Naruto's side and went on to become a famous duo of shinobi and summons. The 2 of them went on to save their land from various threats from all manner of sources. The 3 former Jinchuriki all saw these new simulated worlds through a screen, and while the other 2 were happy that their Biju were happy, Naruto couldn't help but cry a bit. Kurama had been his only friend for so long, and even in the simulation he remained by his side. He wished that things were different, that they could remain together until the end, but for his idea to work, all people must be equal otherwise no one would stick to the plan. He had sacrificed so much for his revenge and it was taking a toll on his psyche. He had lost his home, but that wasn't really his home since they spent his entire life torturing as well as trying to kill/control him. Then there was the loss of his fiancée, which once again was a lie but it still hurt since that was not only an attack on the mind but one on his heart as well. Then there were the friends who were killed while he was hiding away from the forces of Konoha all these years. The loss to freely explore the world since he would have been attacked if Konoha had so much as got a glimpse of him anywhere. True, he could fight them off but he wanted their technology to remain a mystery until this moment of time. But now he had to sacrifice his lifelong friend, one who had always been there for him. True, the 2 of them never got along, with Naruto not even knowing about him until he was 13. Yet the demon had saved his life time and time again while every last one of his so-called friends back in Konoha had faked their like of him so as to keep him ignorant of the truth of their plans for him. He was going to make Konoha pay dearly for what they had cost him, and luckily he had so many others who were of the same mindset since they also lost so much to Konoha. They had all paid such a high price to get to this point of time, and now it was time for Konoha to pay for it instead. So with a quick meeting between him and his captains, he and many of the forces of the militia geared up and headed towards their respective airships to carry out their orders. Tonight marked the end for Konoha, the so-called Fire Empire. And as Naruto, Utakata, and their men boarded the airship that would take them towards their destination, Naruto couldn't help but smirk about it as he donned his helmet. Today, the various nobles of the newly established Fire Empire were attending a party that they all thought was rightfully deserved. They had all financially backed the shinobi of Konoha who had made this dream of theirs of them ruling over everyone else a reality. They were all in the main gathering hall of the palace, with the wine flowing endlessly and the nobles laughing in their victory. The place was guarded all over by samurai as well as shinobi, but not too heavily guarded since who would attack them now that their enemies had all but been wiped out and or enslaved. Even if those they assumed fled west were to return to fight them, that was an issue for the future since it wasn't like an army was just going to appear out of thin air and be able to reach them without being seen by the numerous outposts they had. Yet if only they knew that it wasn't an army that was doing just that, but two small squads, no more than 24 people, they would have lost their minds. Said people were led by Naruto himself, as well as Utakata whose men took up half the roster for this mission. They were snipers and marksmen with the mission to eliminate all external forces while Naruto and his men dealt with those inside. So the two sides separated and went along their separate routes. Naruto and his men, with one of them being none other than Inari, who had spent the past 3 years training relentlessly without stopping, all made their way to the front door. There stood about 3 samurai, but after attaching silencers to their pistols they shot all 3 of them at once before moving the bodies behind the bushes. They wanted to remain hidden for the entire mission until they reached their objective, so they had to take the extra steps to hide the bodies. Once hidden, Naruto moved to the door with his pulse knife out. He stabbed the wall and saw that there were 2 men inside the doors as well, which he and the others saw via their helmets. So Naruto took quick aim and shot both of them through the door in the head before he opened them up and once more hid the bodies in the bushes. Once inside, they saw that there were 4 different paths open to them. There were 3 sets of stairs with 2 of them leading upwards while the third led towards the basement area. The fourth was simply the main hallway which at the moment was empty, which went to show that the security detail here was very lax in their jobs right now. They split up into 4 groups of 3, all heading in their own direction with Naruto taking Inari and another into the hallway while the others went their own directions. They moved quickly, but quietly through the halls, eliminating any and all forces they came across. There was a bit of hesitation when it came to the killing of the staff that was here serving the nobles. But after a quick observation, Naruto's forces were able to discern where their loyalties lied from their lack of an enslaving seal as well as their own banter about how the other villages had fallen, so they were killed as well. They did stop for a brief moment though when one of the men, or woman actually, made a call to him. "Commander," said the woman over the comms in their helmet. "I read you," responded Naruto, "go ahead." "I have located the fire daimyo's wife and 2 children. She is putting them to sleep before she returns to the party. Please advise." "Terminate all forces," said Naruto plainly. He felt nothing for these people who had killed off so many, so he didn't really feel sympathy for them right now. "Do what needs to be done." "Affirmative," said the woman. Said woman was in the exact same state of mind as Naruto was. She had been in Suna the day Konoha had invaded them and was forced to watch as her husband was killed in front of her by hanging. Her hatred of them only manifested more when she was then forced to watch as they hung her 4-year-old son as well before she was restrained and shipped off to be enslaved. Her mind had broken when that happened, and it was only healed when Utakata and his men saved them all before bringing them to New Angel City. There she was taught by Naruto, or at least the holographic version of him that trained everyone who wished it in the simulators. She wasn't a shinobi in Suna, but right now that didn't mean anything since she had killed at least half a dozen of them without them even knowing she was there, so who was the real stealthy unit here? "Keep moving," said Naruto to the others in his immediate group as he heard 3 muffled shots over the mic, signifying that the woman had terminated the fire daimyo's family as ordered. They made their way through the palace and did a clean sweep to ensure all forces of Konoha were eliminated. They finished on their end, with the added bonus of a noble couple that was fornicating in a spare room away from the party. They were killed as well, with the irony being that they were both cheating on their spouses when they died. But eventually they made it to the main area that they were trying to get to, which was a short hallway leading to a large door that itself led into the gathering hall where the sounds of a party could be clearly heard right now even with it closed. Naruto and his men waited for others to finish sweeping through their own sections, which in time they did and regrouped with Naruto. Once all together, they all moved their way towards the door. Naruto stood there with Inari and the others who had come into the palace with him. He placed a breaching charge on the door, but before he activated it, he stabbed the wall with a pulse knife to make sure their targets were within. His helmet showed so many people were within the room they were about to breach, but that was the whole plan since they had killed all the samurai and shinobi who were guarding this place. 6. What is your status? Asked Naruto. We are in position across the garden, said Yotakata in response. Me and the others got a clear line of sight of those in the room ahead. Is our target amongst them? Let me check, replied Yotakata as he looked through the scope of his sniper rifle to get a better view. Just a second. Still searching. Still searching. Yes. I can confirm that the target is within the room. Where is his location? He is currently at the far end of the room conversing with someone unknown. It isn't anyone else on the list, so you are clear to breach. Thanks for the info, said Naruto with a smirk. Now was the time for shock and awe, and man, the amount of shock that these people were about to be in was nothing short of hysterical for him and his men. So he held up his hand as a sign to stand back before he blew the charge. Once they followed his orders, he pushed the button on the detonator and heard as the doors were blown off their hinges inwards. He heard screams as the partygoers were scared out of their minds since they had no idea as to what the fuck was going on right now. Naruto and his men moved quickly and threw in smoke grenades to cover the room in thick smoke. Inari and one other stood by the door while the others walked in and opened fire with their suppressed weapons. They had thermal vision, so the smoke did not hinder their vision in any way. The bodies started to hit the floor, and as they did, the screams began to stop. A few guards who had been in the room tried to sneak up behind them, but that was where Yotakata and his group came into play. They sniped anyone dumb enough to try and ambush them. By the end, all who remained alive were Minato, Kushina, and the fire daimyo himself. The latter was about a second from shitting himself out of fear while the former were standing in front of him in a protective manner. This scene made Naruto laugh since it was funny for him. Kushina had been the first one to strike using her chakra chains as a means to do so, since she and her husband were not here to fight, but to party along with the fire daimyo and the other nobles of Fire Country. They didn't bring their normal gear and were not fully prepared for this fight. Naruto dashed forward to meet her attack head-on, which shocked her since that was not what she was expecting. But a second before her chains made contact, Naruto slid under them so they missed him. Once he had a clear line of sight, he aimed and fired his grappling hook towards Kushina, which wrapped around her neck before he pulled her towards him. The wires cut into her neck and made it hard to breathe, which made it hard to think straight. Once within striking range, he grabbed her head and full-on hit her with a face breaker with his metal-padded knee. She was knocked out cold with a heavily bleeding nose that was more than likely broken given the loud crack they had heard when Naruto had struck her. Minato called out to his wife in rage that this strangely armored man had struck her. Naruto then void-walked to dodge Minato's Rasengan that he threw at him in retaliation, which caught Minato off guard since as far as he knew no one had an ability akin to the Hiraishin other than him. And Naruto capitalized on that surprise by reappearing behind him and then whipped out a device he had been saving for this moment and slammed it hard into Minato's chest. The device he used was an advanced version of the chakra leeching device that had been used on himself when he and the other members of Squad 7 went to protect Koyuki from her uncle in the former Snow Country. The thing basically crippled Minato for the moment as it inhibited him from using anything chakra-related, which was what he wanted. He saw Minato on his knees while squirming in pain as the device sucked him dry. It wouldn't kill him, but it was still painful as all hell and made it hard for him to move right now. Too bad his old man didn't have a Biju sealed within himself to overclock the device and break it so it no longer worked like he did. "Who are you?" asked the fire daimyo in fear since he saw both Minato as well as Kushina go down so easily. "Why are you here attacking us?" "As for the who," said Naruto with a chuckle, "I am the commander of the militia." "What is the militia?" "We are an army that consists of the remnants of the countries your forces have seen fit to eliminate and enslave," said Naruto simply. "And as for why we are attacking, well, I think I answered that by telling you who we are." There is no need for such violence," stuttered the fire daimyo in fear, since with Naruto's answer he knew his chances of surviving this were slim, going on impossible. "We could work something out here if you would just spare my life." "Oh, how the mighty have fallen," said Naruto in anger. It pissed him off so much to see someone who no less than 5 minutes ago was celebrating the conquering end. Enslavement of so many people now begging for his life when his own forces had not granted his enemies such a mercy even when they begged for it. You had no qualms about ordering the slaughter of everyone outside of Fire Country, yet here you are begging for your life like a little sissy bitch. Grow a pair and man the fuck up." If, stuttered the fire daimyo who was seriously doubting he would get out of this now, "if you are going to kill me, at least spare my wife and children." "Your wife and children have already been killed," said Inari coldly. He had heard it when the female militia member had done the deed. So there is no need to beg for the already deceased. "Please," said the fire daimyo, who was about a second away from pissing himself now, who now got on his knees and bowed before Naruto of all people as he begged, "Please spare my life. I will give you anything you desire." "I'm not going to kill you," said Naruto simply, and he meant that as he did. "Since I was born in Fire Country, you have done nothing to me personally, so I have no personal grudge against you." "ODHA," started the now crying older man, who was crying tears of joy thinking that he would survive this. "I said I wouldn't kill you," corrected Naruto with a chuckle, "but you see, my men were not born from Fire Country. They were born in the countries you had wiped out or enslaved, so your death will be by their hands, not mine." "Kami, save me," shouted the fire daimyo. "Kami won't save you," said Naruto coldly, "since she has much more important shit to do than save the life of filth like you. But what makes this whole situation far better is that you were destined to die here today with or without our intervention." "What are you talking about?" "Well, of course you wouldn't know about it," said Naruto with a chuckle that was joined in by the others who knew the truth as well, "but this man over here." He said that last part and pointed at Minato, who was still trying his hardest to break free of the device that was sapping him of the means to strike down his opponent. "Was planning to kill you." "What?" said the fire daimyo with a look of shock that was even more so than the sudden attack Naruto and his group hit him with. "All the people in this room," said Naruto as he held out his arms to emphasize the point that he meant all the now deceased people who he as well as his soldiers had killed, had been convinced that they needed a strong ruler to lead them in this new empire you have founded. They all were convinced by Minato himself that you were not qualified to rule it, and so this was meant to be a celebration that ended in the death of you and your family. Then why the hell did you come here?" "Mainly to send a very powerful message to him personally," said Naruto as he walked towards Minato, "as well as to piss him off by taking away his chance to kill you. But there isn't really anything else that needs to be said, so I am done talking with you." The fire daimyo would have said more, but Inari stabbed him through the throat with his knife so that the man could not speak. "Do you remember me, asshole?" asked Inari as he pushed the side of his helmet to show his face to the man. "Years ago I came with my grandfather Tajuna as he signed the paperwork that set up a trading agreement with Wave Country. You even laughed and drank sake with the man." Inari held his knife's handle so hard to the point his hand was turning red, not that you could see it since he had his gloves on. "You allied with us with a kami-given smile on your face. And then you had your men kill my family. Rot in hell where filth like you belong." Inari then pulled out his blade, which caused the fire daimyo's blood to spray out for a second before the man fell forward and fell into a pool of his own blood. "Minato namikaze," said Naruto as he pulled over a chair, turned it around so that the back was towards said man, and then sat in it the wrong way. "How long has it been since we last saw one another? 7 years? Wait a sec, yeah, it has been 7 years. Damn, how time flies." Minato could only glare at him since the device on him not only sapped his chakra but paralyzed him as well, which only made it far more effective. The irony was that the battery was short-lived and the prisoner's chakra was supplying it with the energy it needed to stay activated. Naruto pulled out a pack of smokes, which he had taken up over time. He wasn't as heavy a smoker as Yotakata was, but he enjoyed a good smoke once in a while. And being in a setting where your worst enemy was paralyzed without the opportunity to fight back right in front of you seemed like the perfect time to smoke. "You don't recognize me, old man?" asked Naruto with a chuckle. "Well, that makes sense really. Since I have the helmet on and all, plus you never really got to know me since you abandoned me within a day of my birth." Naruto then pushed the side of his helmet so that his face became visible to others. Minato's eyes opened wide as he saw that it was Naruto himself who was behind the armor. So many questions were going through his mind right now, like just where he had gotten that armor? Where did he get the gadgets/weapons that he and the others who came with him used to kill off an entire room filled with people like they had? Or better yet, just where the hell he had learned to use the ability that was akin to the Hirishin? He nor anyone else had taught Naruto about the signature jutsu that had made him a legend in the Third Shinobi War, nor would they ever. Too many questions were flowing in his head, but he couldn't even voice a single one since the device Naruto put on him silenced him in such a painful manner. Yet another question to pile onto his mountain of them he already had. "I see that you recognize me now," said Naruto as he placed the cigarette into his mouth and flipped his lighter and lit his smoke with it. Naruto took his time to relax and enjoy the moment, since it wasn't every day you made a man with such a infamous reputation your bitch like this. He took a drag of his cigarette before he blew the smoke into Minato's face. "So there is at least that. It's not much, but it is something." Naruto saw as Minato was struggling so hard to try and break free of the device on him, which was only amplified by his rage and hatred towards the man who was sitting across from him right now. But even with that boost in power he was still not going to break free from its grip. "You can't talk, so simply listen. We are as we told the now late Fire Daimyo, the militia. For years we have awaited this day, the day you won your little war and threw a massive celebration to celebrate your victory. And now that day is here. Allow me to shine some light on things you are unaware of. All those people who have disappeared? The ones you assumed went west past the borders of the elemental countries? They are all still here. They never left, instead they got stronger and simply waited for this point of time where they could get their revenge against your forces. You hid in the dark to manipulate events to get to where you were today, but while you hid in the darkness, we were behind you, our hands slowly tightening around your throat until the moment we could snap your fucking neck. Every fiber of my being is telling me to kill you and that bitch you call a wife right here, right now. But I am not going to. And do you know why?" He saw Minato glaring at him, but other than that he couldn't say anything else. "Because I want you to deliver a message of war to those who reside within Konoha," said Naruto as he got up out of the chair he was sitting on. He kicked the thing hard to the side to the point it broke against the wall. I want you to gather up your forces and make a feeble attempt at defending this empire of yours you spent your whole life making. I want you to come at us with everything you possibly have, and when you finally realize that your best isn't enough to win, I want you to despair. Then, and only then, will you know but a fraction of my pain. The very pain you left me to suffer through in a vain attempt to make a weapon for your future use. So go home, Minato. Go home and prepare, for we will show you no mercy, just as you have not shown anyone else. Naruto then pushed the side of his helmet again and Minato saw it close up so Naruto's face was no longer visible. It was far more advanced than anything else their own forces had, even with the things they found in Snow Country. Naruto walked away after giving his men the signal to retreat, which they did but not before Inari spit on Minato's face before he closed his helmet as well. Naruto did take a moment to flick his cigarette to the ground and stomp it out though. And within several minutes, since time was no longer a factor as they exited the palace, the only ones still left alive were Minato and his wife, all alone in a palace filled with nothing but corpses. Konoha was in a state of frenzy right now. So much had happened so fast and it was taking everything for the citizens to not lose their shit about it all. The last several years, they had all heard one story after another about how they were conquering the entirety of the elemental countries. How the shinobi of the other villages were no match for them given they had the advanced technology to turn the tides of war in their favor, which they were using flawlessly. Then they heard that the war was officially over, that the Fire Empire had been established. With those still outside of their village being enslaved to do their bidding as well as being all transported to Konoha to begin the massive reconstruction project that Minato had planned to make Konoha the new capital city of the empire itself. And what better way to do it than use literal slave labor to make it? The citizens didn't care, in fact they were looking forward to it. Hell, there was an active slave market for those they had already brought in the past several years. But now things had happened that shattered their delusions of grandeur. Many shinobi had been there when Kushina as well as Minato had hiroshined back into the village, and the news they brought back was dire indeed. It had taken the two of them time to get back since Kushina had to wake up from Naruto knocking her out so as to remove the device that kept Minato in place. While they had planned on having the IT sector look into it, given it was fairly high-tech in comparison to their own, it had blown up in her hands seconds after it was removed. The explosion itself wasn't too bad since it was made to destroy the device and not kill the person who removed it. Though Kushina's hand did suffer a ton of damage with her having to go to the hospital to fix it. Minato joined her there, and they got better quickly with the aid of Tsunade and many other doctors. But as soon as he was able to, Minato called a meeting with the other clan heads. There he told them about the attack on the party, that somehow their plans to assassinate the fire daimyo to secure his place as the emperor had been compromised. That there was another army that had been hidden even from them all this time that consisted of the people they all assumed fled west to escape them. But what made them all both pissed as well as shocked was that Naruto was the one who was leading them. This led to much arguing over how to capture the brat to make him the weapon he was supposed to be for the village, but Minato silenced them and told them it wasn't that simple. Naruto had come into a heavily guarded place and killed all inside with about a dozen men without so much as setting off any sort of alarm as they did. This spoke volumes of the skills Naruto now possessed, and it did not bode well for them if they didn't prepare for whatever attack Naruto had planned. So Minato ordered all men outside of the village in the labor camps to return home so as to defend the capital. Their slaves were already marked with seals so they couldn't escape even if they wanted to. And so summons were used to deliver the message to their troops. Though in the end, the response was not good. All troops outside of Konoha had been systematically wiped out in one fell swoop. While Naruto and his group had attacked the palace, the rest of the troops had been busy elsewhere wiping out Konoha troops elsewhere. The people who were enslaved were assured that they would soon be free, and there had been much celebration on that alone. So all the troops within Konoha were all they had to fend off an unknown number of enemies who wielded technology the likes none of them had ever seen. So a plan of defense was devised with the help of Shikimaru along with his father. The walls were sealed up with the strongest seals they could put on them. Trenches with spikes were dug outside of the walls, with plenty of trap seals hidden all around to kill any unsuspecting enemy. Jiraiya as well as Tsunade were prepared to summon their summons at a moment's notice to help defend the village as the first line of defense. And to top it all off, the Biju were successfully extracted into the bodies of loyal shinobi, thus killing their former vessels whose bodies were then burned since Konoha didn't care about them, just the demons inside them. And as all this was happening, Naruto and the other captains of the militia were observing back at the war table all the changes being made to the defenses around Konoha. They all smirked since they saw their enemy try so hard to plan ahead to defeat an enemy they had no idea was using far superior technology. But they would soon learn. Today was the day that Konoha fell. Today was the day the Fire Empire burned. The entirety of the forces that made up the militia stood in place as they saw Naruto and the few other captains he had appointed the position walk up to the stage where a podium was waiting for him. The people were so happy right now, mainly because the day they had waited for so long was finally upon them, and now they were just one speech away from their vengeance. "Citizens of New Angel City," said Naruto loud and clear, with his face being not only visible to the troops that made up their army, but on screen to those who were still simply civilians and not at the airfield themselves. For years we have had to watch as Konoha waged their war with everyone else in the elemental continent. All this time you had to bottle the rage you had against them, with every part of your mind telling you to take the weapons we have here and to fight the enemy by yourself since we weren't moving fast enough. Trust me, I understand perfectly. I was here when the MIRVs built New Angel City and the first thing I wanted to do was just that, but the tactical portion of my head knew that alone I wouldn't be able to fight them. They had spent so many years implanting their shinobi into every major village, every town, every branch of government so as to eliminate those who would be a threat to their dictatorial rule. Weeding them out would have been impossible alone, and even if I managed to win, it would have been impossible to fully weed them out like this. This was the reason I gave each and every one of you when you decided to join the militia, and each and every one of you agreed with me since you all saw the same logic I did when you thought about it yourself. But now the war Konoha has started is over. Those they deemed as not one of their own has been branded with a seal to enslave them, and this will make separating their forces all the more easier. It was this fact that allowed you all to free your fellow citizens of the now former major villages from the labor camps they were placed in, and it will continue to help us when we storm Konoha itself and whip them off the face of the planet. But as your commander, I only lead you into battle, I have no say on just what you will do once the fighting starts, so I ask you one simple question. My orders are to eliminate Konoha down to the very last man. No survivors to gather their strength and seek revenge, no one with some notion they are superior because their parents told them that. I want the very fact that Konoha even existed to be forgotten and all records of their corruption to be eliminated. So I ask you, fellow members of the militia, who is with me? As soon as Naruto said that, all those in attendance raised their fists to the skies to show they were with him in his line of thought. Konoha hadn't spared them when they were invaded, and went so far as to rip families apart and murder their children in front of them. There were fathers and mothers who were forced to watch as the family they loved with all their hearts were hung like traitors when they weren't any such thing themselves. They had not a single iota of compassion towards those who would do that in the vain belief of superiority. Today will be the day when the enemy's will of fire will burn them alive. Naruto heard as the people began to chant burn, burn, burn over and over. They continued to do so as they all headed towards the armory to gather up their gear they would be using. Naruto and the other pilots made their way to the Titan hangar and did some last-minute calibrations to make sure that everything was running smoothly and nothing malfunctioned in the middle of the battle. So far everything was going great, with the militia members boarding their various airships to travel to their destination. The plan was to land a distance away from Konoha so they didn't fully see the vehicles they had to use against them. Let the enemy assume they knew enough about their opponent and make the first move, which would then be easily countered given their technological superiority. The Titans were put into the teleporting hangar, which was where they went so they could teleport in instead of having to be airdropped into the fray. Naruto and the last of the troops entered their airships and began to take off in full force. The skies were dotted with them, and eventually they made it to their set destination. From there, they disembarked and marched the distance until they reached the outskirts of the open area that Konoha had made to make the trenches to stop them. Too bad they wouldn't really amount to much since the militia was aware of them and planned around it. So the troops set up the equipment like they had been ordered and stood in line while waiting for Konoha to notice them and make their move. Luckily for them, they didn't have to wait for very long since those on guard duty noticed them shortly after they had arrived and sounded the alarm to let the others in the village know they were about to be under attack. The shinobi from Konoha all began to scramble as those assigned to guard the wall went there and the others prepared in the village itself on the off chance the enemy got inside. They doubted it would happen but they still prepared nonetheless. Both Tsunade as well as Jiraiya made their way to the wall as well, and with the hand signs needed to do so, they summoned up a small army of toads and slugs. Their summons knew what was at stake and were ready to fight to the end here today. It wasn't just for the village, but their own vanity they fought. Since Konoha had effectively defeated any and all other shinobi capable of summoning, they were the only two summon types left to be summoned like this. That gave them a massive boost in pride since in the realm of summons that gave them much more power than before. So here stood the two armies. One with plans of invasion and eradication, with the other of defending and eradication. Both sides grew tense and waited to see who would be the one to make the first move here. And in the end, it turned out to be Konoha who made the first move. Little did they know it would be their first and final mistake in this battle. Jiraiya ordered the toads to combine their efforts to spit out a tsunami of oil at the opposing forces so as to light it aflame, with Tsunade ordering the slugs to spit acid at it to make it even more deadly. Not sure if that would actually make it so, but they weren't really thinking logically here, more along the lines of destroying their opponents as soon as possible with the least amount of casualties on their own side. The massive flames that the toads had shot towards them, followed by the tsunami of acid slime, neared the forces of the militia, but they did not fret in the slightest. Naruto actually smirked as it got near them as he pulled out a switch and flipped it on. While the forces of Konoha had gone through their preparations of getting everyone to their proper positions, the militia was doing the same, but just far quicker about it. They had set up a ring of shield generators to surround their army that turned on after Naruto flipped the switch. So none of the flames or the acid hit them since the technology that made the shields was far stronger. Though the walls of flames didn't hurt them in the slightest, they did manage to cover their shield dome so that those on the walls couldn't see them either. This offered them the perfect opportunity to surprise the enemy in a manner they would not see coming. "Pilots," said Naruto calmly as he stepped forward, "prepare for TitanFall." This had been the moment the members of the militia had been waiting for. The pilots that had finished their training all stepped forward and summoned their Titan in front of them. All 4 of them appeared and opened up for their respective pilots to enter. Once inside they all did the usual start-up process, and then they waited for the signal to open fire. The shinobi that aligned the wall looked out and truly thought they had already won this fight. They saw as the massive summons of both Jiraiya as well as Tsunade had used a massive combined jutsu to eliminate them all in one fell swoop. But their cries of victory suddenly turned to cries of horror as they saw one of the toad summons, who happened to be Gamabunte's oldest son, have his entire head blown off from the shot fired from Utakata's Tone Titan's 40mm tracker cannon. The toad had his shield up when he died, but the bullet had gone right through it and still killed him. That was when Naruto gave the other pilots the order to open fire. And open fire they did, making short work of the summons that had been the vanguard of Konoha's defenses. Naruto had ran through the bullets with BT equipped with the Ronin loadout, all the while gunning for Gamabunta personally. The trenches between him and his target that had been meant to stop an invading army were all basically worthless since they were designed with humans in mind, not large metallic creatures that dwarfed them. Plus the traps were chakra sensitive and as such BT didn't trigger them since he was not someone who used chakra in any sort. If this had been back when Naruto first charged BT's batteries with the chakra from Kyuubi, that would have been a different story. But after New Angel City became fully operational with the harvester doing its thing, there was no need to do that anymore since they got energy from another source instead. The large toad had been just as bad as the rest of his so-called family since he had kept the truth hidden from him for years as well, even though he was one of their summoners. But halfway there, Katsuya got in between him and Gamabunta and spat acid directly at him. The acid though didn't work since while it was strong enough to melt stones, it wasn't capable of melting the metal BT was made of. Naruto ordered Mei to fire her Titan's T-203 thermite launcher towards him, which she did. BT grabbed a hold of the canister that contained the highly flammable gas launched towards them and with one hand shoved it into Katsuya's mouth. Using his scanner to sense where it currently was, BT then locked onto it and fired with his cluster missiles. These hit the canister and caused it to ignite within the giant slug. The people from Konoha heard her scream in pain, but none were as hurt by it than Tsunade herself since Katsuya had been her summon since she was a little girl. This was essentially the death of a loved one and she would make Naruto and his army pay for this action dearly. Gamabunta had taken this as the time to attempt to strike BT while he was distracted. Yet BT flawlessly blocked Gamabunta's blade with his own. "You will not harm my pilot," said BT in a cold mechanical voice. This shocked Gamabunta that this metal beast could even speak in the first place. But the term pilot was a mystery to him since he had never heard of such a thing. "What the hell is a pilot?" demanded Gamabunta, who was still very angry over the death of his son as well as the rest of the toads who were still being killed as they spoke. BT didn't answer with words though. What he did was open his hatch so that Gamabunta could see Naruto inside of him, with his own helmet opened so that his face could be seen. All the while Naruto was holding a charge rifle that he had been warming up before the hatch opened. "That would be me, you dumbass," said Naruto before he pulled the trigger. The charge rifle fired a laser beam straight through Gamabunta's face, leaving a hole where it used to be. BT then closed back up and threw the now dead body to the side since it was no longer a threat, nor were the rest of the summons since the last one had just been terminated seconds after Gamabunta had died. The Konoha shinobi looked at this in disbelief that their first line of defense had actually been defeated in front of their very eyes. Yet what shocked them more was the fact that while they assumed these large metallic creatures would rush them all at once, that wasn't the case since the one that they assumed was the leader, given he had charged through all the bullets and attacked Gamabunta himself. Retreated as soon as he was dead. This was all part of the plan though, since Naruto knew that the seals on the walls that surrounded Konoha were still intact. He had no idea just how strong they were since he was not proficient in their use, so he had no means to replicate them back in New Angel City for testing. He had made a device to deal with seals put on people, but seals of this caliber were another thing altogether and he didn't have a device to erase them. But he did understand that just like with the shield generators that they could make out of the advanced technology they had access to, seals eventually ran out of power if pushed too far. "All Ion Titans, front and center," ordered Naruto to his men. And out of the group of Titans, the dozen that were Ion stepped forward. They were the most common in use by the militia, and that would help them so much right now. "Focus fire your laser cores on the walls surrounding Konoha." "Affirmative," said the pilots that he had called out to. They had their Titans step forward and unleash their Titans' massive laser beams that required the use of all their power towards Konoha. As Naruto had expected, the second the beams hit the area near the walls, the seals were activated in a visible manner. He had to admit that he was impressed with the fact they were standing up to such a high-tech barrage like this, but they didn't last long since after about 20 seconds the seals that powered the barriers fizzled out since the chakra put into them was depleted. The shinobi on the wall were even more frightened by this fact since both their first line of defense as well as the shield that protected their village's wall were gone. They all braced for the attack that they just knew was coming, which they were clearly at a disadvantage since they had nothing to counter the metallic beasts that Naruto and his army had within their army. But to their surprise, no such attack happened. In fact, the invading forces were just standing there all menacing like with no clear indication that they were going to charge forward or the like. Why weren't they attacking? It was only after several minutes of this awkward stare down that they finally got the answer to their question. One of the Konoha shinobi saw about a dozen men run away from their wall, which made him question where the fuck they came from since the only thing to charge at them was the one Titan. But then the realization of what this implied hit the forefront of his mind. He looked over the edge of the wall and his eyes widened as he saw dozens of square packages stuck to the wall they were on right now while a singular blinking red light was flashing on all of them. While he might not know about the advanced technology that the militia had at their disposal, he did know explosives when he saw them. "Get off the wall," shouted the shinobi, but by the time anyone heard him, it had been far too late to act on it. Naruto had waited until his men were a safe distance away from the wall before he activated the detonator for the payloads of C4 he had placed on the wall. The Titans had done their part by eliminating the summons that actually posed a threat to the militia, but now that their trump cards were eliminated, the rest of the militia wanted their pound of flesh from the people who had invaded as well as enslaved their families. He had to wait for the barrier to be destroyed before he could use the C4 though, and the ion laser beams had been the perfect cover for his men to put them into place. And with the click of a button, the wall was no more. The members of the militia heard the explosion that decimated the wall that separated them from the shinobi cowering behind it, and then came the screams as the shinobi that had protected the wall were killed off by blood loss from the explosions or falling debris. The destruction of the wall had been the signal that the militia had all been waiting for, and the second they saw it they all began to charge forward. The survivors of the wall saw them charging forward and began to retreat back further inwards into the village so as to use the environment to their advantage, but none of them made it far as they were all gunned down after turning around. There were a few people still alive in the wreckage, either because they were stuck in some manner or they were missing a limb such as a leg and lacked the ability to escape. One such person had been Tsunade, who along with Jiraiya had been on the wall to hopefully watch as Naruto failed in his struggle that they all thought would fail. But now here she was, her fear of blood paralyzing her in place on her knees as she stared at the only remains of Jiraiya. He had been crushed by falling debris as he had pushed Tsunade out the way to save her from it. So only his hand was there while the rest of his body was crushed with his blood pooling out from under the debris. The tears fell heavily as Tsunade couldn't move, but then she felt something pressed on the back of her head along with a voice she hadn't heard in years. "Hello Tsunade," said Naruto coldly as he held his B3 Wingman Elite to the back of her head. So much hatred and rage was coursing through him as he looked at the back of this woman who he had foolishly respected at one point. To think that at one point he had nearly died to save her sorry ass so as to bring her back to Konoha since they needed a new Hokage after Hiruzen died, only for her to be a part of the plan in turning him into a mindless weapon. He had no sympathy for this old hag, and he was about to sever any attachments he might have still had right now. And goodbye old Huggy. Naruto then pulled the trigger of his rifle, sending a bullet through her brain and causing her to fall forward since her body was nothing more than a corpse. Naruto then turned around as he was passed by the various members of the militia who were storming the village beside him and chuckled to himself. That was only 2 of the people on his personal shit list he wanted to take care of, and now he had to hunt the others before his men got to them. Man, he had his work cut out for him, but with a quick use of his grappling hook he took to the roofs and joined the others in their invasion. Their orders were clear as day. There were to be no survivors on this day. This will be it for this reading.